Have you ever stopped to wonder why, as the years pile up and your hair turns silver, the idea of popping over to a friend's house starts feeling less like a ball and more like a roll of the dice? A gamble you're not sure you want to take. Picture this. You're 65, 72, maybe even pushing 80, and that warm thrill you once felt knocking on someone's door, arms full of homemade cookies or a bottle of wine to share, has faded into a quiet hesitation. A little voice in your head whispering, maybe I shouldn't go. Maybe it's not worth it. You're not imagining it, and you're definitely not alone in feeling that tug. In fact, 99% of seniors don't fully grasp why visiting others can turn risky as we age. And it's not just about creaky knees or a slower step that takes a little longer to cross the street. There's something deeper brewing beneath the surface, hidden traps woven into the fabric of social calls that can trip you up, stress you out, or even break your heart if you don't see them coming. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on this subtle shift, digging into the surprising, sometimes downright startling reasons why stepping into someone else's home can feel like walking into a minefield, and why so many of us over 60 are quietly backing away, choosing the comfort of our own four walls over the uncertainty beyond them. Stick with me all the way to the end, because by the time we're done, you'll see why these risks matter more than you might think, how they've played out in real lives I've watched up close, and what you can do to navigate them without losing the connections that still light up your days. The last twist? It's a risk most folks never see coming, a slaver one that sneaks up silent and strong, and it might just change how you think about your next visit, whether it's tomorrow or next week. Before we dive headfirst into this eye-opening journey, if you're ready to uncover truths that could keep you safe, sane, and steady in your golden years, hit that like button right now. It's the spark that keeps me bringing you these raw, real lessons straight from the heart. New here? Smash that subscribe button and tap the bell so you don't miss a single drop of this hard-earned wisdom. Love what you're hearing so far? Drop a number 1 in the comments below. I want to see it light up. Not feeling it? Toss me a number 0 so I can tweak it and come back stronger for you next time. And hey, where are you tuning in from today? Drop your city, your little corner of the world. I'm itching to know who's out there riding this wave with me. Let's get rolling, because there's too much at stake to wait. Think back to your younger days, your 20s, 30s, maybe even your 40s, when inviting friends over that was as natural as breathing, as easy as flipping on the radio and letting the music fill the room. The table groaned under platters of food, laughter bounced off the walls like a living thing, and the hours melted away in a warm haze of stories, shared secrets, and the kind of connection that felt unbreakable. Back then, home was a haven, a sacred space where sincerity ruled the roost, where you could kick off your shoes, let your hair down, and just be yourself without a second thought. I can still see those nights, my mom hosting card games in our cluttered living room, her friends spilling over the couch with coffee cups in hand, my buddies piling into my tiny apartment for pizza and beer, all of us young and loud and real, no pretenses, no filters. We believed friendship was built on honesty, on showing up as you were, flaws and all. No masks, no games, just the pure, unvarnished truth of who we were together. But as the decades stack up like chapters in a book, something shifts under your feet. That easy, carefree joy of visiting starts to fray at the edges, replaced by a tangle of doubts and quiet risks you never saw coming when you were too busy living to notice. It's not just nostalgia painting those old days golden. Society's changed, we've changed, and the stakes of stepping into someone else's space have climbed higher than we ever could have imagined back then. I've seen it unfold right in front of me. My Uncle Bao overstepping without a clue. My neighbor, Mrs. Kim, pulling back after one too many awkward visits. Their stories echoing a truth too many seniors miss. Why does visiting feel risky now? It's not just inconvenience or a tired body. It's a web of emotional, social, even physical pitfalls that can leave you rattled, rethinking every step you take outside your door. Today, we're unpacking it all with stories that hit close to home and lessons I've learned through years of watching, living, and sometimes stumbling myself. Let's dive into the first reason it's riskier than you might ever have guessed. Visiting others as a senior can be risky because it often stirs up misunderstandings that cut deeper than you expect. And the wounds don't heal as fast as they used to. Back in your younger years, a casual drop-in was a gift, a little burst of sunshine in someone's day. Your buddy's door swung open wide and you were greeted with a grin, a cold drink, maybe a bear hug that said you were family. It was simple, effortless, the kind of gesture that knit you closer without a word. But now, as the years stretch out behind you, things aren't so straightforward anymore. And what you mean as kindness can twist into something else entirely. Take my Uncle Bao, he's 78 now, a wiry guy with a laugh that could fill a stadium and a heart that's always been too big for his own good, spilling over with generosity even when he doesn't see the fallout. A few years back, he reconnected with an old fishing pal, Mr. Tan, who lived just a few blocks over in our little town. They'd swap tales about the big catches that got away, their voices rising over the clink of teacups. And Uncle Bao, thrilled to have a buddy again after too many quiet years, started showing up every weekend like clockwork. Arms loaded with snacks he'd whipped up, a thermos of tea steaming in his hand, ready to relive those glory days by the riverbank. At first, Mr. Tan seemed all in, clapped him on the back with that old familiarity, poured the tea, let the hours roll by in a haze of nostalgia. I'd see Uncle Bao head out, his step lighter than it had been in ages, and I'd think, good for him. He's found his spark again. But after a month or so, I noticed him coming home different, quieter, his shoulders slumped like he'd carried something heavy back with him. One evening, he sat me down at his kitchen table, the lines on his face deeper than usual, and spilled it all. Tan pulled me aside today, said his wife's fed up. She doesn't like me barging in all the time, messing up their routine, taking up their space. His voice cracked, eyes wet with a hurt he couldn't hide. He'd thought he was welcome, thought that open door meant what it used to mean decades ago when friendship was a handshake deal. Turns out Tan's wife saw it as an intrusion, a disruption to her carefully balanced days, and she'd been stewing in silence, her irritation bubbling under the surface until it boiled over into words Tan had to pass along. Uncle Bao didn't mean any harm. He just missed the old days, the ease of showing up unannounced. But that misunderstanding hit him like a freight train, left him second-guessing every friendship he had left, wondering who else might be smiling through gritted teeth. I've been there myself, dropped by a neighbor's place at 6 to 6, full of chattering good intentions, only to catch a tight-lipped smile and a quick, "Oh, we're busy today," that sent me shuffling back home, cheeks burning, feeling like a fool who'd misread the script. Age shifts the rules under your feet. What was once a gesture of love can now spark tension, resentment, even a rift you can't mend with an apology or a laugh. Families have their own rhythms now. Kids running wild, schedules packed tight, unspoken stresses was simmering. And as seniors, we don't always see the cracks we're stepping into until they split wide open. I saw it with my friend Mr. Vin too, 75, visited his niece every Sunday, thought he was a hero bringing fruit, until she snapped one day, "We're fine without you hovering." He stopped going, pride bruised, heart sore. Visiting risks misreading the room, assuming a welcome that isn't there and that sting. It lingers longer when you're older, when connections feel rarer, more fragile, harder to rebuild after they've cracked. Uncle Bao still fishes alone now, his thermos a quiet companion. He learned the hard way that showing up can cost more than you're ready to pay. Then there's the physical toll. Visiting can wear you down in ways your younger self never warned you about, turning a simple trip into a battle you didn't sign up for. When you were 30, hopping in the car or trekking a few blocks to a friend's place was nothing. A quick jaunt, a burst of energy that barely registered, your body humming along like a well-oiled machine. But at 70, 75, 80, it's a whole different game and the scoreboard isn't in your favor anymore. My neighbor, Mrs. Kim, 72, used to be the queen of her social rounds. Card games at one friend's house, tea at another's, always bustling from door to door with a smile that could light up the street. Last year, though, she started cutting back, pulling away from the chatter and the clatter, and I couldn't figure out why, until I saw her hobble home one afternoon, her cane trembling in her grip, her face pinched with exhaustion like she'd run a marathon instead of walk 3 blocks. She sat me down over a steaming cup of coffee one morning and laid it bare, her voice low but steady. I went to Linda's last week. 3 blocks. No big deal, right? Took me 20 minutes to get there, knees screaming the whole way like they were begging me to turn back. Then I'm climbing her stairs, hauling myself up one step at a time, gripping the rail till my knuckles went white. And by the time I finally sit down on her couch, I'm too wiped out to even talk. She let out a laugh, but it was hollow, brittle. Her body couldn't keep up with her spirit anymore, and it crushed her to admit it, to see that gap widen between what she wanted and what she could do. I've felt that ache myself. Hit 67 one summer, trudged over to a pal's barbecue a mile away, thought I'd be fine with a bottle of water and a good attitude, but halfway there my back seized up like a rusted hinge, left me leaning on a fence post, panting, cursing my stubbornness for not taking the car. Age brings limits you can't argue with, stiff joints that groan with every ballon, arm over bend, shaky balance that makes you second-guess each step, a heart that protests too much effort with a thudding reminder you're not 40 anymore. Mrs. Kim's friend didn't get it, kept pushing, come over, it's no trouble. But for her, it was a marathon she couldn't run, a test her body failed every time she tried. She missed a step once on those stairs, twisted her ankle bad, spent weeks healing, hobbling around her kitchen, pride as bruised as her foot, vowing she'd never risk it again. I saw it with my dad, too, 75. Drove to a cousin's place an hour away, tired himself out on the way there, nodded off at the wheel coming back, nearly clipped a telephone pole before he jolted awake, white-knuckled and swearing off long trips. The physical strain sneaks up on you like a shadow, turns a simple visit into a gamble with your strength. Will you make it there? Will you get back? Will you pay for it tomorrow with a body that won't move? Mrs. Kim's mostly home now. Her card game's a memory. She learned visiting's a risk to her health, not just her pride, and it's one too many seniors can't afford to take when the stakes are a fall, a sprain, or worse. Another risk that hits hard is the emotional baggage that visits can unpack when you least expect it, leaving you raw and reeling where you once stood strong. We're not as tough as we used to be. Age softens you up, strips away the armor you wore in your 30s and 40s, leaves you tender where you once brushed off blows with a shrug. My Aunt Lynn, 69, found this out the hard way, and it's a lesson that still echoes in her quiet days. She used to visit her old friend Mrs. Ho every month, 2 widows who'd weathered life's storms together, bonded by loss, sipping tea and trading memories over a scarred wooden table in Hoa's cozy kitchen. It sounded perfect, a lifeline in a sea of lonely years, until one day Mrs. Hoa offhandedly mentioned Lynn's late husband. He'd have hated this new coffee shop down the street. Too fancy for him, all those lattes and nonsense. Innocent enough, just a passing remark, but it hit Lynn like a brick to the chest, sent her spiraling into grief she thought she'd buried years ago, a flood of memories she'd locked away rushing back in sharp, jagged pieces. She came home that night pale as a ghost, voice shaky, hands clasped tight around a cold mug, as she told me, I couldn't stay. Every word after that felt like a knife twisting in me, cutting deeper than I could stand. She'd gone looking for comfort, a soft place to land, and left with wounds reopened. Her trust in those visits shaken to the core. I've been there myself, visited a buddy at 65, full of good vibes, and he cracked a joke about my gray hair. You're looking ancient these days. Meant it light, but it landed wrong, dredged up insecurities I didn't even know I was carrying. Left me quiet the rest of the night, wondering when I'd started feeling so old. Age makes you tender, fragile in ways you don't expect. Conversations can twist into triggers. Old hurts flare up like embers catching a breeze. And what starts as a friendly chat can end in tears, silence, or a knot in your gut you can't untie. Lien stopped going after that. Hoa didn't understand, called a few times, thought she'd offended her somehow. But Lien couldn't explain it, couldn't face that risk again. I saw it with my cousin too, 73. Visited a friend, talk turned to kids, and a stray comment about his estranged son sent him home brooding, replaying regrets he'd fought to forget. Visiting risks that emotional minefield. Grief over lost love, envy of others' lives, regret over paths not taken. And when you're older, those blows hit harder, dig deeper, heal slower. Leave you wary of the next knock on the door, wondering if it'll lift you up or drag you down. And here's one we don't talk about enough. Visiting can expose you to judgment. You're too tired to fight, a scrutiny that chips away at your confidence when you're already feeling the weight of years. People size you up, even if they don't mean to. It's human nature. And at 70 or 80, that unspoken critique stings more than it ever did when you were young and brash. My pal, Mr. Tran, 76, loved his weekly dinners with a neighbor couple. Good food, good laughs, a ritual that kept him tethered after his wife passed. He'd shuffle over in his old loafers, jacket frayed at the cuffs, happy just to be there, until he noticed the wife's eyes lingering a little too long on his worn-out shoes, his faded shirt, her smile tightening at the corners. One night she chirped, "You should treat yourself, Tran. Get something new, spruce up a bit." All bright and bubbly, like she was doing him a favor, but it landed like a slap across his weathered face. He told me later, voice low over a beer in his dim living room, "I felt small, didn't realize I looked that rough till she said it." He'd gone to relax, to feel at home, and left feeling judged, his pride bruised raw, his sense of self wobbling like a chair with a broken leg. I felt that sting, hit 68, showed up at a friend's place into my comfy sweater, the one with the stretched collar, caught a smirk flicker across his face. Spent the whole night wondering if I'd embarrassed myself, if I'd let myself go without noticing. Age shifts how you're seen. Your quirks that used to charm now draw side eyes. Your slower pace gets a sigh. Your style gets a once-over. And visits can turn into a spotlight you didn't sign up for, shining on every crack you have tried to ignore. Mr. Tran dialed back after that, said he'd rather stay home, sip his tea in peace, than feel like a charity case under someone's gaze. My mom faced it too, 79. Visited a niece who tutted at her messy hair, all tangled from the wind, and she came home deflated, fussing with a comb, muttering about looking sloppy. I tried it once, 70, went to a neighbor's in my old jeans, got a lecture on keeping up appearances, left with my head down, wishing I'd stayed into my armchair. Visiting risks that quiet judgment, the kind that creeps under your skin, and when you're older, it's harder to shrug off, harder to keep showing up with your chin high when every glance feels like a verdict you didn't ask for. Then there's the flip side. Visiting can pull you into drama you don't need, tossing you into someone else's chaos when all you wanted was a quiet hour. Life's messy, always has been. But other people's homes, they're petri dishes for trouble. Brewing storms you don't see until you're soaked. My cousin Mrs. Fong, 71, learned this the hard way when she popped by her friend's place last spring, thinking she'd get a cup of tea and a ketchup. Instead, she walked straight into a shouting match. Her friend's son yelling at his wife across the kitchen, plates slamming on the counter, tension thick as zwart and twice as sticky. Fong froze in the doorway, bag still slung over her shoulder. Tried to duck out with a mumbled excuse, but they dragged her in. "Tell him he's wrong, Fong. You see it." And suddenly she's refereeing a fight she didn't start, her heart racing, palms sweaty, wishing she'd never left her couch. She came home rattled, hands shaking as she poured water, told me over the phone, "I just wanted tea, not a war. I'm too old for this." She'd gone looking for peace, a soft moment with a friend, and got chaos instead. A whirlwind that left her jumpy for weeks, checking her locks twice before bed. I've stepped into it myself. 66, visited a pal on a whim, walked into his daughter's meltdown over a boyfriend, tears and slammed doors, spent an hour dodging accusations and soothing nerves when all I'd wanted was a beer and a laugh. Age makes you crave calm like a lifeline. Drama hits harder, sticks longer, rattles your bones when you're already fighting to keep steady, and visiting risks tossing you into someone else's storm without a raincoat. Mrs. Fuang swore off it after that, said she'd rather knit in silence than play peacemaker. Again. My Uncle Dad tried one more time, 77, caught a neighbor's rant about politics that turned into a red-faced shouting match, left with a headache and a vow to stick to his porch. I saw it with my aunt too, 74, visited a friend, got roped into a sibling feud, came home pale, muttering about crazy people. Visiting's a gamble. Will it be calm or will you stumble into a mess that's not yours to clean up? And too often, seniors lose that bet when all they wanted was a quiet connection. Another layer that sneaks up is the economic gap that visits can spotlight. And it's a gut punch when it lands, leaving you feeling smaller than you should. Money's always been a quiet divider, but as you age, those gaps yawn wider. And stepping into someone else's world can rub your nose in it. My friend Mrs. Lien, 73, used to visit her old coworker Mrs. Enge every couple of weeks. Two retirees, catching up over snacks, swapping stories about the office days. Anga's house gleamed like a showroom. New furniture polished to a shine, fancy gadgets blinking on the counter. While Lan's pension barely covered her rent and a few extras, her apartment a patchwork of thrift store finds. One day, Nya started bragging about a cruise she'd taken, 3 weeks in the Caribbean, all bubbly and bright, and Lan just nodded, her stomach twisting into knots she couldn't name. She told me later, voice soft over tea in her dim kitchen, I felt poor, didn't realize it till she kept going on about it, all those ports and fancy dinners. She stopped going after that, couldn't handle the comparison, the quiet envy gnawing at her every time she saw Nya's shiny life next to her own threadbare one. I've felt that pinch myself, 67, visited a buddy who'd upgraded to a big screen TV and a shiny new car while I nursed my beat-up hatchback with duct tape on the bumper. Left feeling less, not more, like I'd missed some memo on how to live right. Age sharpens those differences. Money gaps that didn't matter at 30 now loom large, towering over you. And visiting risks laying them bare in ways that dent your pride. Mrs. Land's happier alone now, tending her little herb pots. My dad faced it too, 80, saw a cousin's sprawling mansion, came home muttering about wasted years and how he'd never kept up. I tried it once. 69, visited a friend with a renovated deck, all sleek wood and glass while my porch sagged, spent the drive back tallying what I didn't have. Visiting can spotlight that divide, turn a friendly chat into a mirror you don't want to look in. And for seniors, it's a risk that hits your peace where it hurts most, leaving you questioning your worth when you should be savoring your days. Finally, the sleeper risk, visiting can strain your health in ways you can't predict. Beyond the trek itself, with threats that creep in silent and strike hard. It's not just the walk or the drive, it's the unseen stuff. The germs, the stress, the overreach that your body can't bounce back from like it used to. My Grandma Lien, 81, loved her neighbor visits, card games, gossip, a ritual that kept her sharp, until she caught a flu that laid her flat for a month, a brutal reminder of how fragile she'd become. She'd gone over one crisp fall day, sat laughing over tea, didn't realize their grandkid was sniffling in the next room. A walking germ bomb she couldn't dodge. Came back coughing, a dry rasp that turned wet and heavy. And by night, she was shivering under blankets, weak lungs struggling, old bones aching. She barely pulled through, spent weeks propped up in bed, her spark dimmed, and it scared her off visiting for good. I've dodged it myself, 69, visited a pal, felt fine, woke up the next day with a fever from who knows what, spent days kicking myself for not staying home. My immune system not what it was at 50, Age weakens you. Colds hit like freight on trains. Stress spikes your blood pressure into the red zone. Overdoing it lands you in bed or worse. And visiting risks that invisible hit you don't see coming till it's got you. Grandma Lien's homebound now, her cards gathering dust. My Aunt Mai tried it. 76, stressed over a loud visit where voices clashed. Her heart raced too fast, landed her in the ER with a warning from the doc to take it easy. I saw it with my neighbor too, 78, caught a bug at a friend's, pneumonia set in, nearly didn't make it. Visiting's a stealth risk. Will you catch something? Will the noise tip you over? Will you push too far? And for seniors, it's the sleeper that can steal more than your time, leaving you fighting battles your younger self never dreamed of. These risks, misunderstandings that wound, physical strain that breaks, emotional baggage that haunts, judgment that shrinks, drama that shakes, economic gaps that bruise, health hits that blindside, aren't just theories on a page. They're scars etched into lives I've seen, lessons burned into my own years. Uncle Bao's bruised heart from a friend's cold truth, Mrs. Kim's aching knees from a trek too far, Aunt Lynn's reopened wounds from a careless word. They're why visiting's a gamble at our age, a roll of the dice too many seniors don't see it till they've lost. I've learned it myself. Cut back at 68 after too many awkward exits, found peace in my own chair, my own quiet. The lesson's clear and fierce. Know these risks, step light when you must, pick your moments with care, guard your calm like gold. Stay home when it feels right, meet out when it doesn't. Neutral ground's your friend. What hit you hardest today? Bao's sting, Lon's envy, Lien's cough. Drop it in the comments. I'm all ears, waiting to hear what's sticking with you. Love this? Smash that like button, hit subscribe, ring that bell. Let's keep digging deep together. Share this with someone you love, your mom, your pal, your neighbor, because these risks don't wait, and neither should they. See you next time, wiser, steadier, ready to own your days.